Imagine a bright, promising young boy walking home from school, his mind full of dreams, when his life takes a horrifying turn. A routine encounter with a police officer, a person meant to protect, turns into something unimaginably cruel. This isn't just about a badge or authority, it's about a deeply ingrained injustice that nearly cost this boy his life. In this story, we follow the shocking events that unfolded on that fateful day, uncovering how prejudice and power collided in a way that will leave you speechless. But don't lose hope, this isn't where the story ends. Through the courage of one determined family and a community that refused to stay silent, justice was finally within reach. What really happened that day, and how did the system respond to such a terrible act? Stick around, because this story is one you'll never forget. It started like any other afternoon. Marcus, a 14-year-old with a love for basketball and dreams of becoming an engineer, was walking home from school. He'd taken this same route countless times, but that day, something was different. A patrol car slowed down beside him. At first, Marcus didn't think much of it. Maybe the officer was just keeping an eye on the neighborhood, he thought. But then the car stopped, and the officer inside called out to him. Marcus froze, confused but polite, as his parents had always taught him to be. The officer's tone was sharp, almost accusing, as he asked Marcus where he was going and why he was in the area. Despite his calm answers, the questions grew harsher. A sinking feeling gripped Marcus. Something wasn't right. What started as a routine interaction was about to spiral into a moment that would change his life forever. Marcus tried to stay calm, but his heart was racing. The officer's gaze felt more like a glare, and his questions turned into accusations. He claimed Marcus matched the description of someone who had been causing trouble in the area. Marcus insisted he was just heading home, showing his school backpack as proof, but the officer didn't seem to care. Nearby, a small group of neighbors began to gather, sensing something was wrong. One older woman, Mrs. Jenkins, who had known Marcus since he was a toddler, called out, "That's a good boy. He's not who you're looking for." But her voice was drowned out by the officer's commanding tone. He ordered Marcus to empty his pockets, and despite his trembling hands, Marcus complied, revealing nothing but a snack wrapper and a crumpled dollar bill. What happened next left everyone stunned. The officer reached for something on his belt, an action that would escalate this encounter beyond anyone's worst fears. The officer's hand moved toward his taser, and Marcus took a step back, his eyes wide with fear. He stammered, "I didn't do anything," but the officer barked at him to stay still. The tension in the air was suffocating. Mrs. Jenkins yelled again, pleading with the officer to stop, while another neighbor pulled out their phone to start recording. Every second felt like an eternity. Marcus's mind raced. He thought about his mom, who always told him to be respectful and cooperative in these situations, and his dad, who had warned him about moments like this. He wanted to cry, but he knew he couldn't show weakness. "Please just let me go home," he whispered, but the officer didn't respond. Then, as the crowd grew louder and more people started filming, the officer suddenly shouted, "Stop resisting." The words echoed in Marcus's ears, even though he wasn't moving. What happened next left everyone frozen in shock. Before anyone could react, the officer reached for Marcus, grabbing his arm with a force that made the boy stumble. The crowd erupted in protests, their voices overlapping in a wave of disbelief. Marcus cried out, trying to explain again that he hadn't done anything, but his words were drowned out by the officer's commands. Then, something unexpected happened. A man in plain clothes stepped forward from the crowd, holding up a badge of his own. "Let him go," he demanded firmly. The officer froze for a moment, taken aback, but then snapped back with, "This is none of your business." The man didn't back down. "I'm an off-duty officer, and I've been watching this from the start. That kid hasn't done anything wrong." The tension in the air was electric. The crowd was now fully engaged, their phones still recording as they waited to see how this standoff would end. Marcus, still trembling, felt a flicker of hope, but the officer holding him seemed to grow even angrier. What would he do next? The officer's grip on Marcus tightened, his face red with frustration. The off-duty officer stepped closer, his voice steady but firm. "This ends now. You've got dozens of witnesses and cameras on you. Let him go." For a moment, it seemed like the officer might escalate further, but the growing tension in the crowd was impossible to ignore. Muttered protests turned into shouts, and the officer finally released Marcus, shoving him backward. Marcus stumbled but stayed on his feet, his eyes wide with shock. As Marcus backed away toward the safety of the crowd, the off-duty officer demanded the badge number of the officer who had just let him go. The crowd erupted into applause, their relief palpable, but just as it seemed the danger had passed, another twist emerged. A bystander who had been recording spoke up. "I got the whole thing on camera. This wasn't his first time harassing someone." The footage revealed something shocking. The same officer had been involved in multiple questionable incidents targeting young black men in the community. The recordings, combined with witness accounts, became a key piece of evidence in the case that followed. Justice wasn't just served for Marcus, it sparked a deeper investigation into the officer's actions, ensuring that he could no longer misuse his power. For Marcus, the moment was life-changing. Though shaken, he stood stronger, knowing his community and the truth had been on his side. The events of that day became a turning point for Marcus and his community. The video went viral, sparking outrage and calls for accountability. Marcus's parents, heartbroken but proud of their son's bravery, stood by him as the case gained attention. With mounting evidence, the officer was suspended and later faced disciplinary action, bringing long overdue justice not just for Marcus, but for others who had been wronged. For Marcus, life slowly returned to normal, though he would never forget the fear he felt in that moment. But he also wouldn't forget the power of his community, the neighbors who spoke up, the people who recorded, and the off-duty officer who intervened. It taught him that silence wasn't an option, and that standing together could bring real change. As Marcus walked home one day, basketball in hand, he smiled. He knew his story was more than a moment of fear. It was a spark for justice.